was focusing on the spinal cord and the spinal nerves. Chapter 14 is going to start focusing now on this other part of the central nervous system, which is going to be our brain and then those cranial nerves that are attached. Of all the systems, this is probably the one that's most difficult to know a whole lot about, mainly because the brain and nervous system and that sort of thing, we're always finding out new information. In your textbook, this is a pretty good picture right here showing a brain with a glioblastoma. Not sure if you've ever known someone who's had that, okay? Very difficult to treat, mainly because by the time they catch it, it's usually too big for surgery or anything like that to be done. But also, something to note about this is how we're looking at this slice of the brain. We're getting a really good view of each side of the brain, the left and the right hemispheres, our longitudinal fissure that separates the two. We're getting a good picture right here of our brain stem. We've got our cerebellum. So these are going to be the parts now that we begin to look at for this chapter. When we talk about the brain, a lot of times this is the part that most people probably think about when you hear the term brain, okay? But can't remember all of this right here, all right? Because this part that we tend to think of, this is the portion that is most recently developed. It's this part here that's been around the longest, all right? This is more of our primitive portion of the brain because especially our brainstem, this is going to be the part that is pretty much monitoring everything. Cardiac centers, respiratory centers, blood, I mean, all of this type of stuff. But when we talk about it, we're going to say some terms. The terms let us know direction. We've got rostral, we've got caudal. This is how they give points of reference for reading, looking at research, talking about it in the field. Rostral is going to be the area, the direction pointing towards the nose. Caudal, because animals can have a caudal tail, okay? Caudal is going to be towards the back. And looking at the portions that exist, like I said, this is the part people tend to associate with the most. They tend to associate with the cerebrum. We do have this largest portion. It has the two hemispheres, left and right. You often hear people say left brain, right brain, that sort of thing. The markings on it, very significant, very identifiable. You've got these really huge, large folds that are existing. They're the gyri. The little lines that indent between them are the sulci. When we're looking at this, we see some other prominent markings. Right down through the middle, which lets us have the separation between the two halves, okay? Our brain doesn't actually open up like this. But, you know, it does allow, in that longitudinal fissure, separation up to the point that you see this huge white fiber track right there, all right? So we end up with our longitudinal fissure, long, okay? We have our corpus callosum. So when you open up the two halves, like this, y'all get a half. This area that looks almost like the letter C, this is the area of the corpus callosum. This right here is going to be very interesting. Like I said, for the cerebrum, the longitudinal fissure actually indents down very far, but then we don't have these two halves separating at the point of this corpus callosum. Okay? Now, the cerebellum is this portion right here. Once again, two halves, right and left. The foldings and the markings are a little bit different, but still very well defined. All right, you can see the lines and grooves that they're trying to represent. It's going to have a transverse cerebral fissure. So when you open up, they're trying to represent the different ways to look at it. And then if you kind of look down at it, okay, it looks like it's going to have a marking that runs from one side to the next that looks like a little bit of a separation. Not the best on these plastic markings, okay, but you'll be able to match it up with pictures when we're doing labs. And then our brain stem. The brain stem, very interesting part of the brain, to say the least, okay? We do say it's a vertical stalk. Almost looks like the cerebrum rests on top of it. Yeah, sort of, okay? In this area, we're going to have our diencephalon, which we're going to get to, our midbrain, the pons, the medulla. All right? When I say the primitive portion, this is going to be the area that I'm referring to. You'll hear me talk about the primitive portion of the brain. It's going to be the brain stem. Our cerebrum, this one is our area of higher order thinking. So, when it comes to the actual running of the body, okay, the working of the body, this is the area we need to pay attention to, this brain stem. Our cerebellum is going to help us stuff like coordination, like muscle coordination and so forth. So this organ as a whole, very interesting. Got lots of things, terms that are associated with it. We're going to see as we move along, because we've talked about so far spinal cord, spinal nerves. We're now incorporating this part of the central nervous system, the brain, and if you want to think about the cerebrum, cerebellum, brain stem. Remember, there are going to be two systems that control the body. That's going to be the nervous system and the endocrine system. And looking at this picture, one of the things that a lot of these models that we have, this little thing right here, the pituitary gland, okay? Anybody familiar with the pituitary gland? Ever think about it?
I heard about it.
Know anybody who might have to go see somebody like an endocrinologist? Well, the two systems nervous system, endocrine system. Here's the reason that they are related and that they are going to be the two systems that control everything. This area right in here. Here's all the other areas of my brain. All right? I got an area called my thalamus. Do you guys remember us mentioning that? Because that was in the last chapter. What was the job of my thalamus?
Is that where it distributes where all of the sensory information goes?
Yes. So when sensory information has to come in, the thalamus will direct it to the area of the brain it needs to go. Now let me give you an idea about that. Sensory information, okay? Meaning our senses: touch, sight, smell, taste, hearing, equilibrium. In areas of my brain, I have my frontal lobes, parietal lobes, temporal lobes, occipital lobes. Occipital, sight, okay? If we think about sense of taste, temporal, hearing, temporal. Do you see where I'm going with this? So this information goes up the spinal cord, thalamus then sends it to the area of the brain that needs to deal with it. Okay? Now, that means certain areas of my brain have been associated with certain sensory information. Now, in this area right here that looks like it's part of the W, that is my hypothalamus. My hypothalamus has the connection to the pituitary gland. But my hypothalamus is part of my brain. It is part of this tissue, this area that is primitive. What gets released from the pituitary glands? Hormones. Hormones like, probably think estrogen, testosterone.
Growth hormone.
Growth hormone. How about corticotropin? How about oxytocin? ADH.
Would insulin be one? Or is
Now,
that specifically from the...
That is going to be based upon information that's received. That information will cause the pancreatic cells to produce it. So these hormones that are from the pituitary gland connected to the hypothalamus of the brain, okay, are going to go to different areas of the body, different tissues, different organs, different glands, okay, and make them do something. So now I'm seeing that I have control of sensory information. Think about the cerebrum. Cerebellum helps with a lot of stuff like sleep, motor muscle coordination, a lot of things, okay? This area right through here, this area for my brain stem.